For decades, movie posters have acted like polished masks, carefully crafted images meant to reassure viewers that what they are about to watch fits neatly into familiar boxes. A splash of color, a smiling face, a playful tagline, all designed to make a film seem lighter, safer, or more predictable than it truly is. But with horror, these masks have often been used as shields. Studios knew the truth if audiences saw what actually waited behind those posters. Many would think twice before stepping into the theater. So they softened the edges. They brightened the artwork. They disguised films dripping with cruelty, psychological torment, or grim realism behind marketing so gentle it bordered on deceit. Time and time again, unsuspecting viewers bought tickets expecting modest chills, only to find themselves pulled into stories far more disturbing than the advertisements ever suggested. For some, the shock was thrilling. For others, it felt like a betrayal, as though the poster had lured them into a nightmare under false pretenses. Tonight, we're peeling back those masks. We're looking at 15 horror films whose promotional materials, posters, covers, taglines painted a picture that barely resembled what the audience ultimately experienced. These are the movies that hid their true nature in plain sight, wrapped in artwork that told one story while the film told another much darker one. What you expected was never what you actually got. Number 1, Alice Sweet Alice, 1976. The poster for Alice Sweet Alice is deceptively bright, a child in a raincoat, a mask that seems whimsical and colors suggesting stylized, almost playful horror. It promises a quirky, mysterious slasher story centered on a masked child with the tone leaning toward theatrical intrigue. But the film itself is a far darker exploration of religious rigidity, social pressure, and the corrosive impact of suspicion on innocence. Beneath the seemingly playful facade lies a narrative that is emotionally intense, psychologically complex, and morally unsettling. The artwork conceals the psychological and spiritual weight of the story. It omits the oppressive Catholic imagery, the community's moral panic, and the intimate cruelty that drives both the murders and the unfolding drama. Violence is not stylized for shock. It is raw, personal, and amplified by the suffocating tension of guilt, jealousy, and fear. The film's core is an examination of human weakness and the fragility of innocence in a morally rigid society. For viewers expecting a light slasher, the contrast is jarring. As the plot twists and the truth emerges, the poster's playful promise becomes a stark reminder of the story's deceptive presentation. Alice Sweet Alice exemplifies the most extreme disconnect between marketing and narrative. Cheerful visuals hide a tale of profound cruelty, creating a haunting experience that lingers long after the credits roll. Number 2, He Knows You're Alone, 1980. The poster for He Knows You're Alone employs classic slasher imagery, a menacing silhouette, a glinting blade, and a terrified young woman in peril. It promises a typical suburban stalk and slash narrative with dynamic kills and escalating tension. But the reality of the film is far subtler yet more unsettling. The threat is grounded in psychological realism rather than theatrical horror, with suspense created through observation, creeping paranoia, and the quiet presence of a predator who feels unnervingly ordinary. Marketing conceals the film's introspective pacing and emphasis on tension over spectacle. Instead of choreographed deaths or flamboyant scares, the story leverages anticipation and quiet dread to heighten fear. The killer's motivations are disturbingly human, which makes each encounter more threatening than the stylized menace suggested by the poster. Viewers anticipating adrenaline-heavy slasher fun often found themselves disoriented by the film's deliberate restraint. Its power derives from the mundane, made menacing the silence that intensifies anxiety and the slow, inexorable buildup to violence. By selling a spectacle, the poster amplified the impact of this understated terror. He knows you're alone endures because its horror is quiet, psychological, and grounded, yet it feels twice as shocking when wrapped in the false promise of its marketing. Number 3, Humongous 1982. The poster for Humongous evokes classic monster movie energy, bold typography, a looming silhouette, and the promise of a ferocious creature stalking its victims in isolation. It suggests a film brimming with spectacle, frantic chase sequences, and exaggerated gore. Yet the movie concealed behind this marketing is far more somber. Instead of delivering theatrical monster thrills, the story explores the tragic consequences of past trauma, where human cruelty and neglect have created a living nightmare. The beast is not an external force. It is the product of sustained abuse and isolation. The artwork omits the emotional core of the film entirely. It hides the origins of the creature, the psychological weight carried by its victims, and the oppressive stillness of the remote island setting. The terror builds not from cinematic showmanship, but from the bleak reality of survival and the quiet dread that saturates the atmosphere. Violence arrives in intimate, sudden bursts, rather than flamboyant spectacle, amplifying its impact. Audiences expecting an over-the-top creature feature were confronted with a grim meditation on the effects of trauma. The contrast between the bright, pulpy poster and the film's oppressive tone intensifies the horror. Humongous demonstrates how marketing can mislead it, sells spectacle while hiding a story that is psychologically heavy, emotionally devastating, and far darker than the artwork implies. Number 4, The Initiation 1984. The marketing for The Initiation frames it as a lively campus slasher, bright colors, Greek life imagery, and the suggestion of lighthearted pranks gone wrong. The poster implies a fun, formulaic story with familiar teen-beats. Yet the film itself is a psychological puzzle focusing on trauma-fragmented memory and hidden secrets rather than the collegiate mischief promised by its advertisements. The poster never hints at the protagonist's inner turmoil, her hallucinatory visions, or the complex unraveling of identity that drives the narrative. The sorority setting serves only as a backdrop for the film's exploration of perception, memory, and fear. Rather than relying on visual spectacle or energetic kills, the story unfolds with creeping dread and escalating tension. For viewers expecting a conventional college horror film, the reality is unsettling. Each revelation complicates what seemed familiar, and every act of violence or suspense is rooted in psychological depth rather than conventional slasher theatrics. The bright, inviting marketing creates a striking contrast with the film's dark exploration of fear, identity, and the consequences of hidden trauma. The Initiation remains a study in deceptive promotion, where expectations are carefully manipulated to conceal a story far more disturbing than advertised. Number 5, The House on Sorority Row 1983. The poster for The House on Sorority Row is saturated with early 80s slasher tropes, stylish lighting, glamorous young women, and an implication of fun, high-energy horror. It promises mischievous pranks, late-night thrills, and a predictable rhythm of scares. However, the film underneath is far more somber. Instead of a carefree slasher, the story examines the weight of guilt, secrecy, and the psychological burden of a deadly prank gone wrong. The marketing omits the claustrophobic tension within the sorority house, the escalating paranoia, and the moral consequences of the characters' actions. Each death feels consequential, not performative, emphasizing emotional collapse rather than spectacle. The contrast between the polished poster and the film's oppressive tone heightens the audience's sense of unease, revealing a darker story than any marketing would admit. Audiences anticipating a stylish, high-energy horror film were confronted with a narrative built on dread and moral reckoning. The House on Sorority Row subverts expectations, transforming a superficially playful premise into a chilling study of consequences, isolation, and human vulnerability. Number 6, The Mutilator 1984. The poster for The Mutilator presents a loud, almost playful image, bright colors, exaggerated weaponry, and a sense of fun that promises a campy slasher experience. It signals an over-the-top, energetic horror film where outrageous kills are the main attraction. Yet the actual movie is far darker than its marketing suggests. Beneath the bright facade lies a story steeped in grief, familial tension, and violence that feels personal rather than sensational. The energy of the poster belies the oppressive atmosphere that dominates the film. The advertisement omits the emotional foundation of the narrative, the trauma that haunts the characters, the psychological weight of loss, and the isolation that shapes the environment. The kills are sudden and intimate, their impact amplified by the film's deliberate pacing and somber tone. Rather than providing playful thrills, the story unfolds as a bleak reflection on grief and obsession, using slasher tropes as a vehicle for deeper emotional resonance. Viewers expecting campy excitement were often unprepared for the film's intensity. The quiet dread of the isolated setting, the weight of unresolved familial conflict, and the stark realism of the violence contrasted sharply with the poster's exaggerated cheer. The Mutilator illustrates how marketing can mislead, disguising a morally complex and emotionally heavy story behind the appearance of frivolous horror entertainment. Number 7, Mortuary 1983. The poster for Mortuary leans heavily into occult and supernatural motifs, clawing hands, misty graveyards, and suggestive symbols that hint at ghostly or ritualistic horror. It promises a story rooted in paranormal terror, leading viewers to expect ritualistic killings and haunted settings. Yet the film itself is grounded in human malevolence. The threats emerge from manipulation, obsession, and fractured psyches rather than supernatural forces. Marketing emphasizes eerie visuals and mystical suggestion, masking the film's focus on emotional instability and human cruelty. Violence is quiet, intimate, and psychologically charged. The supposed supernatural cues are largely narrative misdirection, leaving audiences surprised when the danger is revealed to be entirely human in origin. For viewers anticipating ghostly terror, the shift to grounded horror is startling. Tension builds slowly, relying on interpersonal dynamics and escalating dread rather than visual spectacle. The poster's supernatural imagery contrasts sharply with the film's realism, intensifying its impact. Mortuary exemplifies deceptive advertising, a ghostly facade that conceals a dark human story beneath. Number 8, Curtains 1983. Curtains is marketed with striking theatrical elegance, velvet drapes, dramatic lighting, and a stylized composition promising a polished, almost operatic slasher experience. The poster implies a calculated, glamorous narrative where kills are choreographed like performances. Yet the film itself defies this promise. Behind its refined exterior lies a fractured story steeped in jealousy, creative rivalry, and psychological disarray. The polished marketing conceals the uneven production, reshuffled scenes, and characters whose appearances fluctuate unpredictably. Viewers expecting sophistication encounter a narrative driven by instability and tension rather than choreographed spectacle. Surreal elements, doll and ice skating figure masked intrusions punctuate the film, yet these are largely omitted or misrepresented in promotional materials. The contrast between the poster's elegance and the movie's chaotic energy enhances the film's unsettling quality, turning expectations on their head. rather than a stylish slasher curtains, becomes a psychological puzzle whose disjointed construction intensifies unease. The poster's glamour acts as a misleading frame, amplifying the impact of each unpredictable moment. It remains a compelling example of marketing that conceals a jagged, emotionally fraught horror experience behind a polished facade. Number 9, The Majorettes, 1987. The poster for The Majorettes radiates bright, cheerful school colors, dynamic poses, and the promise of a typical teen/thriller set in a high-energy cheerleader environment. It implies playful rivalry, familiar tropes, and a simple fun story where a masked killer disrupts a spirited community. But the reality of the film is far bleaker. Instead of a lighthearted slasher, the narrative explores exploitation, systemic corruption, and the moral rot lurking behind the town's surface, giving the audience a far darker story than the poster hints. The artwork conceals the complexity woven into the plot: manipulative adults, hidden vices, and the insidious ways fear and power control the characters. Each murder carries weight emerging from the consequences of greed and moral decay rather than campy showmanship. As the tension escalates, the story abruptly shifts from apparent high school thrills to a narrative of revenge and punishment, leaving audiences unprepared for its grim tone. Viewers expecting a simple, fun horror experience were confronted with moral darkness and intense psychological tension. The contrast between the poster's lively imagery and the film's severe subject matter amplifies the shock. The Majorettes is a study in deceptive marketing. Its bright, energetic visuals disguise a story far more cynical and unsettling than any casual glance could suggest. Number 10, Happy Birthday to Me, 1981. The iconic kebab impalement, featured on the poster for Happy Birthday to Me, has long defined its public image, a sensational, almost outrageous visual designed to draw attention instantly. It suggests a film overflowing with bizarre kills, campy energy, and slasher theatrics cranked to a fever pitch. But the movie beneath that famous image is far more intricate and melancholy than the marketing ever let on. Rather than a string of outlandish murders, the story centers on fractured identity trauma, buried memories, and a protagonist struggling to keep her grasp on reality. The promotional materials highlight shock value, promising spectacle, and excess. What the film actually delivers is a slow-burning psychological thriller that weaves mystery into every scene. The kills operate as clues within a larger emotional puzzle rather than stand-alone moments meant to entertain. Flashbacks, distorted recollections, and a sense of creeping unease dominate the narrative, giving the film a weight that directly contradicts its flamboyant marketing. For many viewers, the disparity was startling. They entered expecting wild stunts and outlandish gore, only to find a somber and emotionally charged story unfolding at a deliberate pace. Even the famous poster kill is more emblematic than representative, an attention-grabbing image that barely reflects the movie's actual tone. Happy Birthday to Me hides its sorrow behind spectacle, making the divide between poster and film one of the most memorable misdirections in early 80s horror marketing. Number 11, American Gothic, 1987. The artwork for American Gothic leans heavily into stylization, presenting its characters with an almost caricature-like charm. The imagery flirts with dark comedy, smiling faces, rustic backgrounds, and a tone that feels more eccentric than threatening. It appears to be a quirky backwoods chiller, perhaps even a tongue-in-cheek slasher with oddball personalities. But the movie itself abandons any sense of playfulness almost immediately. Instead, it sinks into a disturbing exploration of religious extremism, psychological instability, and a family locked in an emotional time capsule of trauma. nothing in the promotional campaign reveals the severity of what lies ahead. The film's oppressive atmosphere, driven by strict moral codes and repressed violence, is nowhere to be found in the artwork. The characters who look merely strange on the poster become frighteningly unhinged once the story unfolds. Their devotion to outdated beliefs and punishing rituals casts a heavy shadow over every moment, turning the isolated homestead into a psychological trap. Viewers expecting camp found themselves in the grip of something far darker. As the protagonist's own mental stability begins to unravel, the film abandons any illusion of quirkiness, replacing it with a chilling spiral into madness and corrupted innocence. The marketing's playful deception makes the film's true cruelty feel even sharper. American Gothic remains a prime example of a smiling poster that conceals a deeply unsettling core. Number 12, The Dorm That Dripped Blood, 1982. At a quick glance, the poster for The Dorm That Dripped Blood looks like a routine entry in the early 80s slasher boom Dark Shadows. A menacing figure and a bold title drenched in red. It seems to promise an uncomplicated thrill ride built on familiar beats. A group of students, an isolated setting, and a killer picking them off one by one. But the experience awaiting viewers is far harsher than the marketing implies. Instead of a fast-paced slasher, the film delivers a bleak, stripped-down descent into isolation and brutality. The promotional material emphasizes excitement and momentum, but the film itself thrives on desolation. Empty hallways, echoing rooms, and abandoned campus spaces create a chilling sense of abandonment that the artwork never hints at. Rather than leaning into stylized kills or colorful characters, the movie strips away the genre's typical Polish-leaving violence that feels abrupt and disquietingly raw. Audiences expecting a fun midnight movie were blindsided by its grimness. The lack of levity, the slow erosion of hope, and the relentless bleak tone stand in stark contrast to the poster's promise of energetic slasher chaos. And when the final twist lands cold, unforgiving, and startlingly nihilistic, it becomes clear just how deceptive the marketing truly was. The Dorm That Dripped Blood doesn't simply mislead, it weaponizes the gap between expectation and reality to deliver a harsher emotional blow than viewers were prepared for. Number 13, Sweet 16, 1983. The advertising for Sweet 16 embraces the visual language of early 80s teen cinema, neon lighting, youthful glamour, and the suggestion of a slasher rooted in adolescent intrigue. The title alone evokes birthday candles, teenage drama, and a touch of playful menace. But beneath that glossy veneer lies a story far more somber than its marketing ever suggested. Instead of a typical teen body count movie, the film explores themes of racial tension, cultural misinterpretation, and the tragic consequences of fear disguised as moral certainty. The poster avoids every element that defines the film's emotional weight. It sidesteps the cultural hostility simmering beneath the surface of the small town, ignores the complex identity struggles of its young characters, and never hints at the sadness permeating its central mystery. The murders aren't stylized set pieces meant to entertain. They are eruptions of misunderstanding and prejudice, each one deepening the story's sense of unease. Audiences expecting light genre fun were confronted with something entirely different, an unexpectedly heavy narrative where personal bias and communal paranoia become the real catalysts for violence. As the truth unfolds, the film's emotional core becomes impossible to ignore. And by the time the final revelation arrives, the cheerful, youthful marketing feels like a veil deliberately placed over a much darker reality. Sweet 16 remains a striking reminder that even the brightest posters can conceal a story shaped by sorrow, conflict, and the fragile nature of perception. Number 14, The Silent Scream 1979. The poster for The Silent Scream exudes sunlit simplicity, youthful faces, bright backdrops, and the promise of coastal thrills as harmless as a summer afternoon. It looks like a breezy slasher built for a young crowd, the kind of film where the danger remains comfortably stylized. But once viewers step into the story, the illusion dissolves almost immediately. Rather than a lively beach adjacent horror romp, the film traps its characters inside a decaying mansion where paranoia, emotional instability, and buried family secrets turn every hallway into a suffocating labyrinth. The marketing hides the film's true nature with surgical precision. It never hints at the deeply troubled matriarch whose presence haunts the house, nor the locked rooms filled with traumatic history, nor the oppressive quiet that blankets the narrative. The trailer emphasizes motion and energy, masking the fact that the movie's power comes from stillness, from moments when the absence of sound becomes a warning in itself. Viewers expecting a conventional slasher quickly realize they had been misled. The violence isn't playful or rhythmic. It's sudden, unnerving, and framed by a sense of emotional decay that the promotional imagery never even approached. As the story spirals deeper into madness, the bright poster becomes a surreal contradiction. The Silent Scream built its legacy on that deception, a sun-drenched advertisement hiding a dark, echoing chamber of fear. Number 15, The Baby 1973. The promotional material for The Baby paints an almost whimsical picture, warm tones, softened imagery, and the suggestion of an odd but harmless family drama. At first glance, it resembles the kind of quirky character study studios occasionally released in the early 1970s. Nothing about the poster prepares viewers for the unnerving world hidden behind that innocent facade. What begins as a seemingly eccentric household quickly reveals itself as a chilling portrait of control, coercion, and psychological imprisonment. The marketing avoids every unsettling detail that defines the film's identity. There is no hint of the adult man forced to live as an infant, no suggestion of the twisted maternal authority that shapes his existence, and certainly no acknowledgement of the warped dependency that the family enforces with terrifying dedication. Instead of signaling danger, the artwork offers reassurance, inviting viewers into a story the studio clearly didn't dare present honestly. As the narrative unfolds, the contrast becomes increasingly disturbing. Moments that should feel absurd instead land with creeping dread, each scene peeling back another layer of manipulation. The characters' intentions grow darker, their control more suffocating, until the viewer realizes just how profoundly the poster misrepresented the experience. And when the final revelation arrives, brutal, unexpected, and morally corrosive, the marketing's gentle tone feels like part of the film's overall deceit. The Baby endures as a masterclass in misleading presentation, a film whose true horrors strike harder precisely because the artwork pretended they didn't exist. BON Lady in a Cage 1964. The poster for Lady in a Cage presents a polished mid-century thriller, carefully arranged typography, dramatic lighting, and Olivia de Havilland posed with elegance, suggesting a controlled, suspenseful drama rather than a chaotic nightmare. At first glance, it promises a sophisticated story of psychological tension. Yet what lies beneath this facade is a relentless, harrowing ordeal that pushes viewers into an uncomfortably raw exploration of human cruelty and societal decay. The artwork obscures the film's real threat intruders, breaking into a powerless woman's home during a power outage, exploiting her confinement with escalating cruelty. The narrative unfolds with little embellishment, stripping away elegance and replacing it with tense, visceral fear. Every act of aggression, every manipulation, emphasizes how vulnerable ordinary people become when morality is suspended, a reality the poster never hints at. Audiences expecting the measured suspense implied by the marketing were often shocked by the sudden chaotic intensity. De Havilland's character is not engaged in a battle of wits or clever survival. She is trapped witnessing society's worst instincts laid bare. The elegance of the poster amplifies the contrast, making each brutal moment land with unexpected force. Lady in a Cage remains a striking example of marketing misdirection, the outward promise of refinement concealing an uncompromising, emotionally draining horror that lingers long after the screen goes dark. If these films have taught us anything, it's that the brightest posters often mask the darkest realities. To continue exploring the hidden histories, the lost footage, and the films that concealed their nightmares behind deceptively cheerful artwork, stay with us. Subscribe, share this episode with someone who still trusts the image on the lobby wall, and return for more secrets. The posters lied, but the shadows always reveal the truth.